Now, moving on to the fourth house, the basement of the chart. The fourth house is known as the IC. The IC stands for the Imum Coeli, and it represents the bottom of heaven. We consider the IC the bottom of heaven because it is indeed the bottom of the chart. There's something very important to note about the angles, the IC and the MC. MC and IC are not synonymous with Zenith and Nadir. They're not. The Zenith is a completely different topic altogether, and the Nadir is a completely different topic altogether. Your midheaven is the crossing point between the local meridian of where you live and the zodiac, which has no relationship at all for the most part unless you live on the equator, the zenith. The zenith, on the other hand, is if you were to take your finger and point straight up to the sky, the middle of heaven from your finger is going to be the zenith. Similarly, if you were to take your finger and point straight down through the center of the earth, the bottom of heaven is going to be your nadir, which may have no relationship with your IC whatsoever. We consider the IC in traditional astrology to be the house of the father. And the reason why the fourth house is the house of the father, traditionally speaking, is because if we apply the Chaldean order of Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon to the 12 houses, we end up with Saturn giving us our physical body in the first house. We end up with Jupiter giving us our milk and our bread and our sustenance in the second house. We end up with Mars giving us our siblings in our third house. And we end up with the Sun giving us our father in the fourth house. The fourth house is not the house of your mother. The fourth house is most definitely the house of your father. I know this because I give blind chart readings all the time in which I describe people's parents from their charts without them saying anything to me at all about those parents. And from my history, being an astrologer who gives blind chart readings, the fourth house is most definitely the house of the father. How else do we know this to be true? If you have the ruler of the fourth house in your first house, you look more like your father. If you have the ruler of the 10th house in your first house, you look more like your mother. If you have the ruler of the fourth house and the 10th house in your first house, whichever planet is closer to the cusp of the ascendant is the parent who you look more like. So this is another way in which we can tell that the fourth house is going to represent the father within our charts, and the 10th house is going to represent the mother within our charts. Now, by extension, the fourth house is also the house of our family. How do we differentiate between the fourth house representing our family versus representing our father? Planets in the fourth house usually are descriptive of what's going on within our family unit, whereas the ruler of the fourth house is usually descriptive of our father as a specific person. So, when we hear that houses mean multiple things, we have to know how do we differentiate between the various topics that that house represents. From a traditional perspective, the fourth house is considered to be the weakest angle, and it kind of makes sense because traditionally speaking, we know that the angular houses have to do with 4 stages within the sun's diurnal journey. The first house represents where the sun rises. The 10th house represents where the sun culminates or is at the highest place in the sky on that given day. The 7th house represents where the sun sets, and the 4th house represents where the sun anti-culminates at midnight. Therefore, if we think about the houses as being distributors of solar power, then the 4th house is definitely going to be the weakest of the angles as far as the power of the planets in the angles are concerned. However, I spend a lot of my time focusing on ancestral astrology. Maybe it's because I'm trying to work on my own family karma, but I've become known for this topic of ancestral astrology or familial astrology. And what I've discovered is that if your 4th house says that you aren't going anywhere, you're not going anywhere, because the 4th house represents to a very large degree the impact that our family home has on us growing up. So if your 4th house, if you are inhibited or prohibited because of some baggage that you're holding on to in your 4th house, that becomes the roots from which everything else within your chart grows. If your family tells you that you're ugly, It leaves an imprint on your entire life that is oftentimes very difficult to shake. So, I believe that even though the fourth house is the weakest angle from the perspective of the distribution of planetary power, I believe it's actually the strongest angle from the perspective of how to live a life. Because if the family situation in the fourth house isn't doing well, that impacts how we perceive ourselves as being people who go on to have our own families. That impacts how we perceive ourselves as people who form intimate romantic relationships. That impacts how well we think we can aspire to having our own career within this lifetime. It impacts how we view ourselves. It impacts so many things. So I believe from a natal astrological perspective, the fourth house is of utmost importance for us to understand and for us to assess. And if you find that you are still holding on to trauma within your fourth house, it is of utmost importance for you to heal and begin that healing in the basement of your chart. Because if your basement sucks, then everything sucks. So that is the fourth house from the family perspective. Now, let's talk about the planets that have a natural analogous relationship with the fourth house and the planets that don't have an analogous relationship with the fourth house. First of all, we love the benefics. So we love Venus, we love Jupiter. Those planets in the fourth house bode well in general. Jupiter in the fourth house could be an indication that we traveled somewhere else and we are living far from where we're actually from, but it could also be an indication that we had a happy home, especially if that Jupiter isn't the ruler of your 12th house. Because if Jupiter is the ruler of your 12th house, then your home probably wasn't that happy because the ruler of the 12th house carries the impact of the 12th house wherever it goes. This is a topic for a different day, but it's important to know that the planets always will carry the impact of the houses they rule. And we know that from a traditional astrological perspective, the only planets that can rule houses are the seven Chaldean planets of Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto don't rule anything from a traditional astrological perspective. So, Venus and Jupiter, we love them in the fourth house. Jupiter in the fourth house, the home was a happy place. Venus in the fourth house, the home was a beautiful or an artistic place. We love the sun within the fourth house because the sun within the fourth house, we love it and we don't love it. The sun within the fourth house can be an indication that our father had a huge presence within our home, but sometimes that can also be an indication that our father had an overwhelming presence within our home that didn't actually allow anybody to live their own best life because so great was his personal mode or way of expressing himself. Mercury in the fourth house is nice. And it's nice because it could represent that your home was a place of great learning. Your home was a place that inspired you to be a better learner or a better speaker, or your home inspired you to be a better student. Your mom probably stayed up with you and helped you with your spelling homework. She probably read books to you. It was a nice place as far as the cultivation of the mind was concerned. And the moon in the fourth house is just nice because the moon in the fourth house is analogous with the fourth house. And this is another thing. The moon is nice in the fourth house because the fourth house represents the home, and the moon also represents the places within which we are held within this lifetime. That does not mean that the fourth house represents the mother. It just means that we like to have a home that feels like the moon. Because when our home feels like the moon, we're taken care of, we're fed, nobody goes hungry, everybody feels loved, everybody feels supported. It's a very good situation to be in. But that does not mean that Cancer is associated with the fourth house at all. So those are the planets that we like to have in the fourth house. Clearly, we like to have the North Node in the fourth house as well, because who doesn't like to have the North Node everywhere? So that's the North Node, and those are the planets within our fourth house. Now, as far as the planets that we do not like to be in our fourth house, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, no. Uranus is the tornado. When we have Uranus in the fourth house, we came from a family of divorce. We came from a family that constantly moved. We came from a family that was completely unstable. We came from a family that didn't make us feel as if we could really establish long-lasting roots within the world, because we switched from school to school 20 times within our lives by the time as we were 10 years old. So we don't have a sense of being stably rooted within the world. The fourth house And the IC specifically is representing our cosmic root within this lifetime. Sure, the moon is also representing our cosmic root, but two things can represent your cosmic root. We don't like the moon to be screwed with. We don't like our IC to be screwed with. So when we have Uranus conjunct the IC, it sets us up for a lifetime of feeling as if we cannot fully dig our heels into the earth and call any place home. And this could have been established from within our childhood, but the tree of this instability only continues to grow and grow and grow and grow throughout the rest of our lives. So maintaining long-lasting friendships might be a challenge, maintaining long-lasting relationships might be a challenge, maintaining long-lasting anything might be a challenge, because so deeply impacted were we by the seed of the constantly moving household. It says to us that we're going to end up carrying and perpetuating that seed into our adulthood, more often than not. Similarly, Neptune conjunct the fourth house cusp can indicate that we come from a household of addiction. Maybe somebody within our family had an alcoholic tendency. Maybe alcoholism was a huge pillar of our familial life. When we have Neptune in the fourth house squaring the ascendant, it oftentimes indicates that we were teased by our family members growing up, or we were teased by our siblings, or we were teased by our parents even. Do you know sometimes people get teased by their parents? We were teased by our parents, and as a result of that, it leaves us feeling cold and wet and soggy all of our lives because we consistently find ourselves feeling not good enough. We consistently find ourselves feeling as if we can't really catch a vital spark to blaze a trail for ourselves within this lifetime because it feels bad. It feels like our entire childhood we were dunked in a big bucket of freezing cold water and we've never really been able to recover from that. So that's the Neptune in the fourth house. That is death by tsunami. Now, Neptune in the fourth house might also indicate that you grew up by the ocean or you grew up by the sea or you grew up in a very spiritual household and home, and we have to see other things going on within the chart to corroborate which direction we should interpret the Neptune in the fourth house. Pluto in the fourth house, death by volcano, can oftentimes indicate that there was a major trauma within the family and home. Maybe somebody was taken away from us suddenly, in the same way as Persephone was suddenly spirited away by Pluto into the underworld. Maybe someone was taken away from us suddenly or violently, and that set the tone of how we continue to interact with life in general. This major trauma within the home was literally the bedrock upon which this home was built. Maybe there was a sense of constant manipulation or gaslighting within the home. Maybe there was some other sense of a very real powerlessness dynamic that we experience within our household and home, and that set up a particular narrative of us being victims within this lifetime as a result of us being victims of abuse, whether that abuse was physical, psychological, emotional, sexual, from people within our early childhood environment. Pluto oftentimes has to do with secrets, and more often than not, the secrets of Pluto are secrets that we don't like to tell. Saturn in the fourth house isn't very bad at all because Saturn in the fourth house could indicate that you just grew up with old people, and as a result of that, in your adult life, you choose to take care of old people. Maybe you work in an old folks' home. Maybe you've always gravitated towards the elderly because you've had old people in your home from the very first day you were born. Maybe you grew up with your grandparents, who knows? But Saturn in the fourth house isn't really so bad, except for the fact that universally speaking, any house that Saturn is in is a bit of a problem. So having Saturn in the fourth house can be an indication that your family, your home, your heritage, those things are going to be the largest topics or the largest areas of concern for you within this lifetime. Mars within the fourth house is oftentimes seen within the charts of people who come from a martial family. Maybe you have a parent who worked in the military or who worked on the defense force or who worked as a police officer or who worked as a firefighter, or maybe you just had a very Martian, violent, volatile, hostile parent. And therefore, that sets up your entire home life to be a violent, volatile, hostile sort of place. So that is Mars in the fourth house. We don't really love it for anyone. I definitely wouldn't want it for myself because Mars in the fourth house is representing afflictions that occur to us as a result of being in a family and being in a home that is rough around the edges. The South Node in the fourth house, just like Saturn, is representing that in this lifetime, you're finding yourself faced with your family and your home as being the major source of learning or as being one of your major karmic burdens within this lifetime. Maybe that manifests in terms of your family leaving you in a state of debt, and therefore the financial insobrieties of the father falls upon the shoulders of the child. Maybe that manifests as you not being able to find a home that really nurtures you within this lifetime. Maybe that manifests as you feeling as if your home is a constant source of depletion. Your home might be a source of depletion for you financially. Maybe you keep on finding mold within your home, and therefore your home never fully feels like some place where you can take rest. However it manifests, having the South Node within the fourth house is oftentimes indicative of the fact that this topic of my life, my family, my father, my home, my heritage is something around which I have to do a great level of karmic unpacking because it's representing a major challenge that I have to navigate or that I have to reconcile within this lifetime.